Isn't that amazing? We all around the table had to wait till they were born to find out, but it's just amazing. Just real quickly, one of the other articles we've posted here is about some of the intensity of the pro-life movement, and here you got Nancy Keenan, former president and head of NARAL, and saying a number of years ago, looking at the numbers of March for Life, I just thought, my gosh, they're all so young. There's so many of them, and they are so young. And you mentioned Marjorie Dannenfelser, who said, when I was pro-abortion, I didn't go to bed thinking, oh, my gosh, women can't be free unless they have an abortion. But now that I'm pro-life, I go to bed every night saying, 3,800 children are going to die tomorrow. What am I going to do to save them? So there seems to be a lot more intensity, a lot more passion in the pro-life movement than you've been able to see in the pro-choice movement, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to rescue children from being killed, and that's has a lot more urgency than killing a child.
It's very interesting. I've seen some of those man-in-the-street interviews. A radio host or whoever, a blogger, will go on the street and say, so what do you think? Should women have a choice or not? It was a great one they did. They were just talking to young people who were not involved in any kind of pro-life or pro-choice. They were just, I think, college students. But they first, the first question was, well, what do you think about this? Do you think a woman should have a right to choose? And it was kind of like they were deciding, should we be able to have more flavors of ice cream? I was like, well, yeah, I think so. But then he had just a little video on his iPad and showing them an early on sonogram of how tiny the baby was, but it was clearly a baby with body parts. It changed those hearts, and I just think it was really a beautiful thing, because I think it was virtually everyone he talked to said, now that you pointed that out to me, maybe not in this right to choose thing. So I think that your technology point is just so well taken, and really you can spread that even without being a mom who's pregnant. You can just spread the knowledge about that and the availability of those kind of videos. It just wakes up your heart.
When you talk about those videos, of course, we mentioned this earlier in the week, but in Atlantic, you had this article, how ultrasound pushed the idea that a fetus is a person. I like what Sean Davis said, how X-rays pushed the idea that we all have a skeleton. Russell Moore on the phone checking with my 5 sons, but since some of them were first revealed to us by ultrasound, I can't be sure that they actually exist. You almost have to deny reality now in light of all that we know, Penna.
Yeah, and they also make the point in that article about the heartbeat, because there's now this push to have bills that would actually make abortion illegal once you hear the heartbeat. And so, it was funny for them to denigrate that idea that there's a heartbeat. But when you go in to have your OB appointments, they listen. That's the first thing they do is listen for the heartbeat. That's the indicator of whether that baby's alive and well.
They had to back that off, didn't they, Debbie? After a while, they just couldn't say that the fetal heartbeat was dubious or imaginary. So they changed the title of the article to How Ultrasound Became Political, because there were so many factual errors in that article in Atlantic, which again just illustrates that if you were going to be pro-choice, you're going to be for abortion, you really just have to deny a lot of reality. And I shared earlier this week how I've done very few, but some debates with abortionists or abortion doctors. I always feel sorry because, it's kind of like moot court. You get one side or the other and you go, oh, I drew this is tough to argue in light of everything we know from science and genetics and even just sheer logic, to then argue that there's no humanity inside the womb.
Oh, absolutely true. And, there's that old adage about, when you're going to a debate like that, is like you're in a battle of wits with an unarmed man. I mean, there's nothing to respond. Once you have the facts about how early the heartbeat comes along, how early the baby is formed as a baby, and it really puts the left or the advocates for pro-choice into a very tough position, because they aren't really, the strident pro-choicers are not really backing down. They're just more or less saying, but we have to protect women, and it's the woman's right to choose, and it's her body. And that's another one I'd love to have the pro-life people, all of us, talk about more is, we're not trying to regulate your body. It's the baby. We're protecting the baby, and that my body, my choice doesn't fly anymore.
It certainly doesn't. Need to take a break, and we could certainly spend some more time on this, but I'm going to move into the enormous number of executive orders. Earlier this week, we listed 12. I think we're up to maybe 15 to 18. I've lost track because there have been so many things happening. Going to talk about some of those, what that might mean. And, of course, we'll take some of your phone calls along the way. If you want to address the issue of abortion, that is certainly fair game, but also we're going to talk about some of these executive orders by President Donald Trump. A lot has happened in just a week, and we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
The Point of View radio talk show is broadcast 2 hours each day, but you can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. There you'll also be among the first to see our new videos, Uncensored, a series highlighting issues impacting this generation and the next. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. At Point of View RTS. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Together, let's go viral. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Debbie Georgatos with us. And let me just try to briefly summarize so many of these executive orders. Of course, Monday, he abandoned the Trans-Pacific Partnership, saying it was a bad deal for workers. Also signed an executive order to renegotiate NAFTA, which is the North America Free Trade Agreement, which was crafted by President Clinton back in 1994. We can, a little bit later, talk more about the executive order that would allow various agency heads to waive requirements of Obamacare, known as the Affordable Care Act, to their maximum extent permitted. You have also on Monday signed an executive order putting a freeze on hiring and wage increases for some government workers. We have about 2.6 in the federal government, but about 1.4 million are uniform personnel. So it would only affect those people that are not military, not national security employees, but still quite a bit. I want to come back in just a minute to freezing all the regulations, especially those that have not been approved. And Debbie and Penna will have some things that will be probably new to all of you on that regard. But since we're talking about the issue of the March for Life, let's also mention that he signed an executive order to defund the International Plan. It has nothing to do with Mexico City other than the fact that in 1984, Ronald Reagan signed this to actually prevent our tax dollars going overseas for abortion. So it sequesters about $400 million. Okay, let's get to Tuesday. Like I said, we can't even cover all these. President Trump signed executive orders reviving the Keystone XL pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, saying that this would put steel workers back to work. Talked a lot about infrastructure. He ordered various agencies and the chairman of the White House Council on Environmental Quality to set up a faster approval for these infrastructure policies. Also signed one that would actually say that the pipelines built and repaired in the United States would be constructed with American-made materials. Now we get to Wednesday, and that is where he directed agencies to step up deportation of the country illegally. Looked at all sorts of different groups for deportation, those who've committed a crime, those who've been accused of a crime, those who are in criminal prosecution, those who've abused welfare, those who actually are a national security risk, which would also hire 10,000 more ICE agents, and also would then direct the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security to block federal grants to sanctuary cities, and Miami's already changed their mind on that one. Signed an executive order to build a wall, and I can talk about some of the ones today and tomorrow, but you get the idea. This has been a flurry of activity, Penna, and I don't think we've ever seen anything like it.
No, we haven't. And, as we mentioned, he has worked hard. He's famously a person who gets up early and goes to bed late, works at night, works upstairs from the shop, as he does in Trump Tower now in the White House. He does. So he has. And he's focused like a laser, I think, on his campaign promises and some of the most important promises that got him elected. And he's worked on those first. And it's interesting to me to see that, because other presidents, even Bush, like he did a tax cut, but a lot of it had to go through Congress, and it took a long time. Well, here, President Obama gave him a perfect opening, because he did so much by executive order that executive orders can be immediately reversed by the next president. And so that's what he has taken advantage of, that possibility and that ability. He also yesterday met with Congress at a retreat. It was a Republican retreat to figure out priorities for Congress to address. And, they disagreed on some things, but mostly agreed on things. And so, he'll be moving that direction with what goes through Congress. And then, as you mentioned also, reversing some of the regulations that have been imposed during the Obama presidency. It's a little more difficult than reversing executive orders, but it's not as difficult as a lot of people are saying.
Debbie, explain the regulations issue, and we have not posted this today, but maybe I can post it on Monday. This appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and it's some of the work done by Todd Gaziano, who's been on this program with us before. It's written by Kimberly Strassel, but this is a game changer, and that's what the title of the article is, right?
It sure is. This Wall Street Journal article, I'm glad you're going to post it next week if you can. Kimberly Strassel is writing about a law that's actually been in place and I guess newly coming to people's attention again, the CRA, Congressional Review Act. And the basic thing of it is this. It passed in 1996, and it says that whenever an agency, a federal agency, so these are not elected people, these are people in the executive branch, pass a regulation that they are required to send Congress a report about the regulation. And Congress would have 60 days from either the passage of the regulation or the report sent by the agency, whichever is later, to essentially eliminate that, to overrule that regulation. The bottom line is Congress gave itself power years ago to say that they would have some review over regulations, but the reality is agencies have not been sending these reports to Congress. So what is now kind of gelled to people on the conservative side in Washington is many of the federal overreaches by numerous agencies in Washington, bureaus, administrations, and executive branch entities. Many of those regulations, they never sent a report to Congress, and these are among the burdensome regulations that Donald Trump talked about in his presidential campaign that hurt businesses from being created, prevent them from expanding, prevent them from hiring. And because those reports never went to Congress, it is now the case that any agency, the new people put in charge of agencies, can send a report to Congress and say, hey, here are regulations. They could be talking about something from 16 years ago. But if the report's just hitting Congress's desk, Congress has 60 days after receipt of that report to overrule the regulation. It is almost impossible to overstate the significance of this, basically just diving in, understanding laws we already have and what their consequence is. And so there is a great ability with some of the labor from the EPA, maybe others, but those two especially, to have Congress overrule them. And one last quick point about it, which is just, this is a monumental thing. It's going to be a game changer in Washington. Kimberly Strassel is right to call it that. What the law says is if Congress does overrule some EPA regulation, the EPA is prohibited from passing that same regulation in the future unless there is a a new law passed by Congress authorizing that. And so essentially, it's not like you can just wait till the next Democrat or next liberal president comes along and agencies put all these back in place. This has monumental potential to really cut back the regulatory burden in our country. And you know what it really is doing? Is putting the power back in the hands of Congress, the people voted that we all vote for.
Yeah. So if you want to, a simple thing would be to say Congress should begin getting these reports sent in, so that the Trump administration can reverse egregious regulations. One piece of information that Kim Strassel put in her article that did my heart good was it's not only regulations, it's also these things called guidances. And you'll remember last spring, the Obama administration sent out some guidances on the issue of education. The Justice Department also sent out guidances about transgender bathrooms, about the idea that bathrooms had to be available to people based on what they felt they were regarding gender that day. And this, certainly has been very controversial. Those guidances can also be reversed under the CRA.
Wow.
And
we're all smiling.
Yeah, that even removes the need for some of these court cases and lawsuits.
Certainly could
if
be.
President Trump would begin to reverse those.
Guidances, regulations, and all that. Let me just mention real quickly that we will probably have mention our action item today, and that is if you go to our website, there's an opportunity for you to support Israel by 2334, which is the resolution from the United Nations, which we have talked about before here on the program. And so as a result, to address which would block funding to the United Nations until this resolution has been repealed. The United States right now provides 22% of the funding of the United Nations. So if you would like to let your senators know how you feel about this attempt by Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Lindsey Graham, we have it very easy for you. We again encourage you to go to the website pointofview.net, click on that button that actually says Support Israel, Block UN Funding, and this would be again just a great opportunity for you to express your opinion about Israel and also about the United Nations But next week, we're going to do something on these game changer regulations. So again, that's all available at the website, pointofview.net. And what are your thoughts about this? It seems to me that'd be a way to get the United Nations' attention by taking away 22% of its funding.
I would love to see that. I think the UN was formed in 1945. It has a wonderful, fabulous purpose to have a method of communication, a means of connecting, but it is really, it's out of control in many ways, and particularly with respect to not honoring Israel and really attacking Israel more times than any other country. It would be a great message for America to send.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we want to talk a little bit about the commentary. Those of you online that'll hear Presidential Promises by Penna Dexter. We'll talk about that right after this.
Peggy Noonan was a speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan. These days, when a president makes an important speech, you can expect to read her thoughts on it in her column in the Wall Street Journal. She may offer praise or critique, but what I really look for is her discernment of the speaker's motivations and her knack for explaining why this particular president said what he said. As President Trump delivered his inaugural address, I kept thinking that it sounded like a campaign speech. That didn't necessarily seem like a bad thing to me. I learned later that lots of people made the same observation. Trump hit his campaign themes hard. This, says Peggy Noonan, was by design. The essential message, she wrote, was, remember those things I said in the campaign? I meant them. I meant it all. President Trump made some big promises in the speech. Some appeal to most Americans. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Of the myriad inner city problems, President Trump said, this American carnage stops right here and stops right now. He said, we'll unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Can an administration really do these things? Will President Trump take his promises seriously? Will he get right to work? Where will he start? There are things the new administration can do right away to get the ball rolling on promise keeping, and it actually did a couple of them on day one. Kelly Shackelford, president and CEO of First Liberty Institute, had a column published last week in The Hill entitled 6 Ways Trump Can Advance Religious Freedom in His First 100 Days. Kelly writes, first and perhaps most ironically, ministries and churches need immediate relief. He explains, ministries have faced crippling multi-million-dollar fines unless they participate in insurance that provides abortion pills and contraceptives against their faith. The government dogmatically continues this threat, but President Trump can eliminate this threat through executive action. On day one, President Trump signed 2 executive orders that begin to fulfill this item on First Liberty's wish list. One of the executive orders declares an immediate freeze on any new federal regulations. The other directs agencies to grant relief to all constituencies affected by the Affordable Care Act. Over the previous few days, federal agencies have been rushing to write as many regulations as they could before the new administration took power. The Trump orders call a halt to the regulation writing and begin the process of reversing burdensome ACA regulations, some of which force businesses and nonprofits to violate the faith convictions of their owners or sponsoring organizations. It's heartening to see this move to unwind repressive regulation. You can read Kelly Shackelford's other 5 recommendations at thehill.com. Hopefully, the new administration works quickly to implement all of them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of your calls in just a minute, but Penna, this piece, Presidential Promises, let me again mention that that is available on our website. If you sign up to receive these Viewpoints commentaries, yours will arrive in people's inbox tomorrow. But this just reminds us that when Donald Trump said he made these campaign promises, he meant to keep them. Been a lot of politicians that say, well, campaign promises are like crusts, meant to be broken. But so far, so good, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it was funny. When we were listening to this speech last week, and I had this impression that this is like a campaign speech, which in a sense sort of reiterates that he really means these things. And then Peggy Noonan from the Wall Street Journal put out her column, and she made that point that, this president really is, going to sort of do what he said he was going to do. And so that was kind of how I started my commentary out. And as the week progressed, I thought I didn't really need to say that in my commentary because he's proved it. Every single day, he's kept another campaign promise with, some kind of an executive action that he's taken, and also his beginnings of negotiations with Congress. So that's one thing. And one of the very first day, the inauguration day, there were 2 executive actions signed. One was to freeze new regulations, and the other one was to sort of remove this onerous, sort of draconian thing. Not totally, you couldn't possibly do that with one executive action, but to take some of the burden of Obamacare off of people. Mm-hmm. And, it was just a way of saying, okay, when you enforce Obamacare, don't do egregious harm to people's sort of rights and freedoms. And so the administration sort of moved toward making it easier for Americans to buy health insurance. And, there are some draconian fines on companies. I mean, the whole Hobby Lobby case was about this, and the Little Sisters of the Poor case was about it for nonprofits, that he's just saying, we're not going to impose that kind of thing anymore. Now, while we're redoing Obamacare, we're going to kind of back off on that. It was a nebulous regulation in a sense. It didn't give specifics, but what it did do was I think it just gave the federal agencies the rights to sort of lift a little bit of the burden of Obamacare. And so I think what that does is it lays the groundwork for then the country to have a new healthcare system that's not so top-down, hopefully. And it was really a campaign promise kept in the best way it could be on the very first day.
Absolutely. And, part of what President Trump did both on the inauguration day and this whole first week, which you, Kerby, mentioned a little while ago, all the regulations, he's really, he is doing exactly what you said. He is following through on what he promised in the campaign. But he's also, it's a larger feel of just a game-changing presidency. We're going to get off our business as usual attitude. We're going to shake up both parties. We're going to make this is a country that exists to represent the people. The people own the power. So a lot of what he did in these regulations, you have the feel they're putting power back in the hands of the people. They're taking it away from Congress and the agencies. They're giving a feel like it has almost a revolutionary feel to it. And I think that it's really what people, even if they couldn't put it in words or point to particular proposals that Donald Trump put forth during his campaign, they had that feel about him. He's not just another guy in Washington who's going to do whatever he pleases. He's going to look out for us. And I think that he's making people feel like that whole feel of his campaign was real.
Mm. Yeah. Let's take some phone calls along the way, and we'll certainly get more calls in the second hour, but we did want to put a few things on the table for you to react to. Let's go, first of all, to Georgia. Dave, I appreciate you waiting, and what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Just a snippet on the pro-choice, if I may.
Sure.
A little nervous, I'll try it, okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
No one really wants to be called pro-abortion these days because we know that's the killing of an unborn child. Pro-choice, though, is no better. When a person says they're pro-choice, they're saying, I'm not personally for abortion, but I feel another person has the right to have one if they choose. That's like saying, I'm not pro-rape, I'm just pro-choice about it. I'm not pro-slave.
Or in the 18th century, especially the 19th century, I would never own slaves, but I really can't tell other people they can't own slaves.
Yeah, let me finish this right here.
Sure.
I said, I'm not pro-slavery, I'm just pro-choice about it. I'm not pro-ISIS beheadings, I'm just pro-choice about them. That's not where we want to stand with regard to the killing of the unborn.
That is well said. And I've always had a problem with the fact that, you have the style manual, the Associated Press has a style manual, and they're just not honest, because if you will call these individuals that support abortion pro-choice, then you should allow people that actually oppose abortion to be called pro-life. But no. So they say, well, if you oppose abortion, then you're anti-abortion. Well, then the other group should be called pro-abortion. But no, they go anti-abortion, pro-choice. And that strikes me as just inherently unfair way of using the language, don't you think?
Yeah, well, it is unfair. And, it's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be another change that we're going to see is what the media gets away with, as we mentioned during the opening of the show.
Let me real quickly just mention again that we just talked about it briefly, but I want to, before we end this first hour, give you an opportunity to take some action. Penna and Debbie, there have been individuals that I've run into as I travel around speaking, and they will say, I'll be really honest, I never wrote to my member of Congress until you made it so easy, because all I have to do is go to pointofview.net, click on the button there that says Support Israel Block UN Funding. defunding. Then I don't even have to think about what I'm going to say because you give me a sample way in which to say that. Sometimes I make some small changes in it because I want to say something a little bit more, or maybe I know this member of Congress, and so I add a hello or something like that. And then all I have to do is put my name and address, and if I've done this before, it just pops up instantaneously, all the other information. My 2 United States senators, I hit send, and I've done my civic duty. So again, this is one that we are encouraging you to respond to. You have senators right now that have actually signed on to Senate Bill 107. The 2 co-sponsors are Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Lindsey Graham. And this is all about this resolution that was put forward in the United Nations, Resolution 2334, which essentially condemns Israel and labels East Jerusalem and parts of Judea and Samaria as occupied cities. Penna, you've traveled to Israel, and you know as well as I do, this would be like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This would be like the Wailing Wall. I mean, it's just unconscionable that this one, first of all, even was put forward, but then that the United States did not veto that particular resolution.
Yeah, we've been able to be depended on to veto resolutions like this, which have been proposed again and again. And I think it was a parting shot by the Obama administration for us not to act on behalf of our ally Israel. And, you know, that's one of the famous things that the UN does that's egregious, and that is always opposing Israel and saying they're on the wrong side. But there's a lot of other things that the UN does. So when I hear defunding the UN, I'm very happy because, for instance, it's an agent of economic redistribution. It pushes the whole mantra of global warming to an extent of control over nations' economies. A lot of times they push a pro-abortion International Planned Parenthood agenda, and now they're beginning to push a gay agenda and same-sex marriage onto countries who are basically have a predominant religion that stands against that. So they're sort of a controlling body that tries to control the policies of nations. And, you know, I don't think it would be bad if the UN didn't exist, but we certainly shouldn't be funding it. And so, especially to the extent that we are. So I think this is a great bill.
I think this is a great opportunity also for Donald Trump to speak up about the importance of American sovereignty, because all the issues you mentioned and issues that the UN addresses, there are very clear laws, policies, history, culture of American society that what we stand for on those issues. And we need to be really clear that the UN we owe no allegiance to them. They do not have sovereignty. And it's kind of because there was a sense during the last 8 years under President Obama that we were slowly conceding sovereignty to the UN on many important issues and kind of treating, well, if they think it's right, that's probably how we'll go. It's a great chance to reassert the unique identity of America and our sovereignty.
Might just mention, too, some of you asked about this the other day. They and the Trump administration are going to reevaluate whether or not $221 million will be sent to the Palestinians, because you had Kay Granger had a hold on it, and President Obama thought it should go out, but they're going to change that. We'll be back right after this.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy. But by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today of our weekend edition, and Penna, Dexter, and Debbie Georgatos in studio. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to get into some more topics in just a minute. We have a few calls left over from the previous hour, but if you are just joining us, we've talked about the March for Life. We've talked about some of these executive orders. This hour we'll get into that in a little more detail. Also talk about what is the possible nominee to the Supreme Court. We've got some possibles, and we'll give you a little bit of an overview there. But let me go first to the state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. And Rodney, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Good afternoon. Yeah, a couple of things I want to touch on, and that is the legality of Roe v. Wade and homosexual marriage.
Sure.
First of all, homosexual marriage. The court said that it's unconstitutional. Well, there's nothing at all in our Constitution about marriage. And that's because our founding fathers were Christians, and they knew marriage was of God, not of man. So there's nothing at all in the Constitution about marriage. And the legality of it, any laws we have to originate in Congress, in the House. That was never done. Roe v. Wade, same thing. It went through the courts. The judges said, boom. Well, it never, ever went to the House for them to draw up a law, to make a law out of it. So therefore, if there is no existing law, you have to go back to the existing. If there's no new law, you go back to the existing law. And the existing law says that abortion is illegal. So therefore, abortion is illegal in this country. There's never been a law drawn up in the House, passed on to the Senate or anything, that made abortion legal.
And I think in some respects, Debbie, let me come to you first as a lawyer. There has been a change in the way we've perceived the Constitution. Now, when the framers wrote this, they were assuming that the strongest and most powerful branch would be the legislative branch, which is why they split it in part. And Federalist paper was at 78. I think you have Alexander Hamilton saying that the weakest of all the branches is the Supreme Court. But what Rodney's reminding us of is today we've sort of flipped that around, and now the most powerful branch is the Supreme Court, which is why we're going to talk about in just a minute who might be on that court. And the second most powerful one, up until a few days ago, was the pen and a phone executive that actually enacted orders without the legislature. And so in some respects, we're not following what the framers intended, or even the tradition of almost 200 years.
That's absolutely correct. And I think that's interesting. Our caller is talking about where is it that a law that should be a law, that where does it come from? And what you're really getting at is this notion, which many Americans have been starting to say, is why have we as Americans surrendered so much power to the judicial branch of the Supreme Court? And, there are precedents that went along, and there was Marbury versus Madison, which was, I don't know when it was, 1812 or something, a long time ago. But, they essentially said that the Supreme Court has the power under the Constitution to determine that laws Congress passes are unconstitutional. And we have pretty much surrendered that. But But interestingly, this is part of what is under this, and I know it's not a topic for today, but part of what's motivating the Convention of States idea is that some people are saying there needs to be something in the Constitution that says there's some way to pull back against the Supreme Court, either the power of Congress to remove Supreme Court members. There maybe with every state you can vote and get, if you have a 2/3 of the states vote against some decision, it is annulled. There's a recognition throughout the country that there may be need to make clear in our Constitution that there is some remedy against this, what has become a really omnipotent Supreme Court. That you're exactly right on marriage and on abortion. Both of those, or neither of those topics is mentioned in the Constitution, and you can spell out on what basis the court came to their conclusions, but what they really just acted as is a super legislature. So I think that, I'm in favor of something that formally begins to undermine the really this, what we have gotten to where we to be.
Yeah, because as Rodney mentions, the legislature, the Congress gets to make laws. 31 states on the issue of marriage made laws that said marriage was between a man and a woman. The court struck that down in Obergefell. And so, we now, our psyche in America is that, okay, well, the court said it, so be it. But that isn't really what was supposed to be. And now, if we could get that back under this administration, if the Trump administration could be so disruptive as to be able to do something like that, that would be, talk about a game changer. Yeah. That would be huge.
President Trump's two things. One is he has one clear opening in the Supreme Court. He may have another in another year or so. He may have more than that during the 4 or 8 years of his presidency. But even if you got 8 Supreme Court justices who are ardently pro-life, what you really want them to do, you still want, even if they issue decisions that all of us in this room and maybe your listeners would like better, what you really want is a Supreme Court limiting itself to the power that was intended to have under the Constitution and not legislating from the Supreme Court bench. Either way, that is the right constitutional answer.
So how do you do that? You have to get Scalia types, people that are originalists. I mean, how do you change that? Because we all sort of accept the Supreme Court's doing business the way it does.
The checks on this, you're right that there is no current vehicle to check the Supreme Court power, but there are proposals in the Convention of States, which is essentially the thing that some conservatives are calling for, to have a convention called by the states. It's into the Constitution, it's permissible, it's provided for in the Constitution, and you could have things like, the right of the Congress to pull back to unauthorized, what would we use? Unauthorized pullback a Supreme Court appointment,
or
just say,
or
nullify a Supreme Court decision. I mean, and that to me, something that just says, they've gone too far. Because then both parties would have that, and ultimately you'd end up with a power back in the hands of the people who pick Congress. So we'd be lobbying our congressmen, saying you need to nullify this Supreme Court decision. That to me puts the power back where it's supposed to be.
The framers had 2 ways to actually deal with it. One was impeachment. When's the last time we've impeached a Supreme Court justice? But they did also have one other one, and that is to limit the appellate jurisdiction. And that's one that even Harry Reid used one time from the Congress. And that is, you could say that Congress has decided that the Supreme Court will no longer deal with religious liberty cases, or they would no longer deal with cases dealing with the cross. And so Kelly Shackelford wouldn't have to pursue all those. So they could do that, but the reality is that we may have to have a convention of states. Governor Greg Abbott has certainly been saying that if you guys cannot come up with a way to actually enact term limits, we're going to push ahead so that we will enact term limits, since you won't enact them on yourself. And if that is the case, then maybe that would be a convention of states that would do some of those other things as well.
Penna, I'm glad you mentioned we have had culturally, politically in our country, we've agreed in the last 10 years or more, or more than that, 50 years, that the Supreme Court's the final arbiter, and we just all need to just give up the argument. And that is really wrong and unnecessary, and it really puts a tremendous amount of power in, as they say, 9 people in black robes.
Who have lifetime appointments.
Yeah, and so the other idea, and we did this in California the years we lived there, we recalled, I think it was 2 or 3 California Supreme Court justices by vote. It's another way to do it.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about people that you maybe not have heard about until now. Neil Gorsuch, as well as William Pryor and Thomas Hardiman and Raymond Kethledge. And these are the possible nominees to the Supreme Court. Even if they don't end up on the Supreme Court, they may end up on the D.C. court. So we're going to introduce you to some that Donald Trump might pick. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, children spend an enormous amount of their day with electronic media. That is what the recent survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation has been able to document. When you add together time spent with television, cell phones, video games, and computers, it essentially becomes a full-time job of more than 53 hours. Needless to say, this is a dramatic increase over a decade ago, and nearly twice as many kids now say that they do at least two of these at the same time. The findings of the survey of over 2,000 young people ages 8 to 18 found that their digital day lasted more than 7 hours a day. The primary media inputs were television and music, but substantial amounts of time were also spent on the computer and playing video games. Although time spent with electronic media is increasing, the researchers did find one area that was decreasing: ink. Daily book readership remains somewhat steady, probably because schools still require them to read books, but reading a magazine dropped 20% and reading a newspaper dropped nearly 20%. You know, the survey had a few surprises. For example, the greatest consumers of electronic media were African American and Hispanic kids, who spend nearly one-third more time each day with electronics than white kids. And heavy media users aren't necessarily couch potatoes. They actually find ways to cram more physical exercise into their lives than light users. While this may be true, I still believe that almost all young people spend too much time with electronic media. You know, for the last 2 decades, I've been talking about the media storm that surrounds our children and grandchildren. This latest survey of our kids' digital days shows that they are in the midst of a greater storm than we have ever imagined. This should concern parents and educators. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some more phone calls in just a minute, but I would suspect that some of you are wondering who Donald Trump will put on the Supreme Court. We have posted an article that I think would be helpful for you to begin to read if you would like. Again, the significance of this is very great because you have one vacancy right now. The court used to be kind of 4, 1, and 4. Now it's 3, 1, and 4. That is 3 conservative justices, 4 that were appointed either by Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. And then the Constitution is whatever Anthony Kennedy says it is any particular day of the year. And so we have also not only one vacancy, but we also have Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to turn 84 in March. Anthony Kennedy is 80, and Stephen Breyer is 78. You don't have to look too far to wonder whether or not it would be possible of President Trump actually being able to appoint 4 members to the Supreme Court, which is completely unprecedented, which is at least a possibility. But Penna, let me come to you. It's not just that, because there are 100 vacancies in the federal court. So we're talking about the Federal Circuit Court and a federal other courts, the Federal Judiciary Court. So we're talking about an opportunity for President Donald Trump and, to be realistically, a Vice President Mike Pence, as well as the people that they're depending on at the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society to change the direction of the court for a generation.
Yeah, this is another We the People issue. And, we've sat here next to Kelly Shackelford here on Fridays, and he's talked about how First Liberty Institute has gone in and really scanned the resumes of the list that Trump put out during his campaign of his people that he would choose from for the Supreme Court. And, of course, Kelly was only happy with a couple of them because there were problematical rulings here and there for the others. And so that gives, I think, that number that you're saying, there could be 4 appointments if Trump gets a second term. That's a huge opportunity for people who want to see the protection of religious liberty, the sanctity of human life, that want to see, our regulations taken off of our businesses across the board and all of that. It's a great opportunity. It's another great opportunity. And so, I'm happy to see that President Trump has said next week he will probably make his selection for the Supreme Court. Let me just mention,
too, that as we look down this list, and we're going to talk about each one, and so you can take some notes if you want. One is 54, one is 50, one's 51, one's 49, which shows you that they would be on the court for a long period of time. And if you need any reminder of that, one of those individuals I mentioned a minute ago, Anthony Kennedy, was appointed by Ronald Reagan. And the other 2 we mentioned were appointed by Bill Clinton. So you can see that the impact that a president can have on the court lasts for decades. And again, if you put like a Neil Gorsuch on it at the age of 49, and he did not get out of the court until he was even 79, which would still be young compared to some of these others, that would be an individual that would spend 30 years on the court. If he went further, as some of these have, he would be on the court for 35 years if he retired about the time in which we think Ruth Bader Ginsburg does. That is just phenomenal in terms of the kind of impact an individual like that would have.
It absolutely is, and goes back to our point we were talking about earlier, that there is just really too much power in the Supreme Court, and you're talking about multi-generational impact of the thinking of just 9 people. One argument I've heard is that we can't get too nitpicky and look at every single decision this particular justice rendered. You have to look at the whole of his or her, time in the bench and the rulings they've made. I will say on that subject, though, that it always seems to be the conservatives that get duped. Yes. That they will choose people that we think are conservative, and somehow they get in the bench and they move toward the left, unlike the liberal justices who are just, in fact, I think, Kerby, we talked about in your show one time, someone ran a study about it and just basically said, when liberals get in the bench, they never deviate from the left-wing agenda. That's and right. The conservatives tend to, and we spoke about Antonin Scalia, too, who was, to me, one of the finest Supreme Court justices. The flag-burning case is a good example. Tell about that. Yeah, in the case of Antonin Scalia, as a personal patriot, a conservative, he deplores flag-burning because he likes people to respect America. But as a Supreme Court justice, when the case came along, is flag-burning protected speech under the First Amendment? He said, yes, it is, because you're burning the flag to speak, to make a point. And so he protected under the First Amendment a flag burner, even though on a personal level, he finds that behavior reprehensible. Right. That is the epitome of someone doing their job as a Supreme Court justice. And one last thing I'll say related to all these people, and we're going to talk about their cases, is that just 1 or 2 decisions, you can say, well, in the grand scheme of a person's life, it wasn't that big a deal. But the truth is, you're going to put someone in power for a long time, and especially if there are cases that seem to significantly deviate from what you would hope a justice would do, those cases do matter, and they should be asked about in their Senate confirmation hearings, and it could be enough to cause a conservative to say no to somebody.
We were burned, as you said, Debbie. For instance, Souter was a George H.W. Bush appointment, I believe, and he was a disappointment. He's been a big disappointment. The Republicans tend to confirm the president's choices. They don't put up a big fight. Right. We've got a Kagan, we've got a Sotomayor, we've got Ginsburg, and they were not really. There wasn't much pushback. But the Democrats do it differently. They do make it very difficult, and that's why Republicans get a little bit sketchy, and Republican presidents often nominate people without big records. Well, a lot of these justices on Trump's list do have records. And so I think we ought to use that tool in order to, and I hope he does, in order to choose the very best, the most consistently ruling nominees. And if you have somebody who's ruled wrong in a certain area that's a real hot button right now, like, for instance, gender identity, transgender rights, something like that, I think that's a huge red flag. And you mentioned, Kerby, the other courts. I neglected to answer your question, but of course, it's very important who this president puts on all the lower courts. I mean, President Obama changed about a third of the judiciary, the federal judiciary, across the board. So, the Supreme Court only gets what's been set up to it. And, it sometimes doesn't even have to take those or even to consider those cases because courts rule correctly and it's left as is. So we can change the cultural landscape by changing the judiciary.
And on that note, I love that there are this many openings, as you mentioned, in the federal courts. And always, I think our listeners probably know, but all the seats, all the district court and the appellate court, which is called the circuit court in the federal level, Supreme Court, all those are seats that are nominated by the president and approved by the Senate. And the notion that we have right now a GOP member, I can't call him a conservative, a GOP president, we have a Republican majority in the Senate and the House. We need to be filling those seats as fast as we can while we have the opportunity to do that, because these are all lifetime appointments, even a district court appointment. All these federal courts are lifetime appointments. Get them filled while you got these 2 years.
Let me give you the names real quickly. One is Neil Gorsuch, and he is 49 years of age. And that is an individual that is kind of in the Denver area because he's on the 10th Circuit Court. A lot of people say, well, he could be pro-life because he wrote a book called The Future of Assisted Suicide and Euthanasia. And certainly that is the case. He's been good friends with Robert George, somebody we've had on the program with us before. And the only negative I've heard is that I know his wife, I don't know if he does, but his wife goes to a very liberal church where they've been really kind of supportive of LGBT issues. I've heard that, but that's about it. Another one is, of course, William Pryor, and we've talked about him before for all sorts of reasons, because whether it's Judge Roy Moore or some of the decisions he's made that have been a little bit more controversial in the 11th Circuit Court. And so then another one, since we're getting to the break, I'll just mention him real quickly and come back and talk more about them. Thomas Hardiman, he's in the Third Circuit Court. Has to be good because he went to law school at Georgetown University.
That's right.
That's where you went, Debbie. So again, and interesting enough, speaks fluent Spanish and has volunteered as a Spanish legal aid. As a matter of fact, he ruled in one case against the wishes of the Alliance Defending Freedom on one of those cases, but tends to be one that I've heard pretty supportive. And Kelly Shackelford, in this article we have here, said that both Gorsuch and Hardiman have excellent opinions on religious freedom. So I think I could take any one of those three. I just might mention one other individual that surfaced is Raymond Kethledge, and he's in New Jersey. But the three that we hear most about, either Neil Gorsuch, or a lot of people thought Bill Pryor, simply because guess who his closest friend is? The next Attorney General, and that is Jeff Sessions. So we'll see which one is picked by the Trump administration. And any one of them would be a lot different than, say, who Hillary Clinton would have put into the Supreme Court.
The Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, have said that if the nominee is not bipartisan and mainstream, they're going to keep that seat open. They're not going to confirm. The Democrats will block it. And so, if you look at Gorsuch and Hardiman, they were both confirmed by the United States Senate, and many of the liberals in the U.S. Senate voted for them. So that's sort of an argument to say, well, they're bipartisan because you already voted for them.
That is a good argument. And I've seen some articles say that if there's anyone the Democrats cannot let on the court, it's Bill Pryor. I don't know if that's the case, but if nothing else, that gives you a little bit of an overview of what might happen on the Supreme Court. And when those confirmation hearings come, buy your popcorn, get a ticket. It's going to be interesting. We'll be right back.
The Point of View radio talk show is broadcast 2 hours each day, but you can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. There you'll also be among the first to see our new videos, Uncensored, a series highlighting issues impacting this generation and the next. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show, @PointOfViewRTS. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Together, let's go viral. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, and Debbie Georgatos. By the way, I might just mention that, Debbie, you have your radio program, and it will be this Sunday, and we have a link to americacanwetalk.org. Of course, you had Ladies Can We Talk, but you broadened it so you can allow us to listen to the program as well. So if you can't listen to it on your local radio station, and I would hope many stations would carry it, you can also watch it or listen to it as well. And I've actually gone on Facebook and watched you guys because it keeps this camera on during the break, so I get to see what you guys are doing. That's kind of fun for me, too. But anyway, America Can We Talk? And we've kind of given you show prep today, haven't we?
Every time I'm on is show prep, yes. So I will tell, thank you for mentioning it. On Facebook at America Can We Talk. You can watch it live or just go to americacanwetalk.org, click on Listen Live. And this week I have on the show Andrew Klavan, who's a very interesting character, and John Stossel. But back to Andrew Klavan, he wrote this thing recently. He said the battle about the world right now, we look at radicalism in America, the battle is about the identity of God. And Andrew Klavan was an atheistic Jew who converted to Christianity like, I don't know when, 4 or 5 years ago. So it's a really profound thing he wrote about. That's really at the heart of the battle in the world. I thought it was wonderful, so you can talk about that.
Well, I want to get him on this program, so get his contact information, because I do know who he is, and we have yet to have him on Point of View. So you can do the initial interview, and we'll do a follow-up one on Point of View.
So I always have to say that it's a good thing that you changed the name of your program to America Can We Talk, because every issue is a woman's issue.
That's right.
So... America.
Yeah, I always felt funny being a member of Concerned Women for America. Penna was, of course, a member for all those years, and I thought, well, okay, but I think you allow us in. But America Can We Talk? And again, we have the link on the website.
Thank you.
Facebook Live, as well as you can find it later on, I think on YouTube as well, and so you can listen to it. So there are all sorts of ways. Penna, before we take some more phone calls, we do have a bank of calls. I wanted to get into just a couple of other issues, because there has been this gap since Antonin Scalia died, and Merrick Garland. Yeah, I just got it backwards. I got his backwards name. Merrick Garland was postponed and then basically faded away. So you still have a situation in which we have a gap that now we've talked about. The Democrats are saying maybe we'll just keep that seat empty for 4 years. I don't think they'll be able to do that. But what about all this? Yeah,
well, we said that too. It's okay to have it empty for a while. And so we did. And Mitch McConnell, who's a Senate Majority Leader, has been very stalwart in not allowing Merrick Garland's nomination to be voted on in the Senate. And from the very beginning, he said he wouldn't, and he didn't. And I think that's something to be said for the backbone there that sometimes we question of the Republicans in the Senate. So the fact that he did that, I think, bodes well that we might be holding sort of our own with regard to any nominees that happen and that take place, that we would also, on the other side, support them. And I think this President Trump is not one to go in and try to find somebody that's going to be acceptable to the other side. I think he will pick someone that will please his base, and then we'll have to fight for it. And so it's going to be a battle.
It certainly is. What about the issue of trying to put some of these people on the court? We oftentimes see that whether it's Republicans or Democrats, but mostly it's Democrats preventing a vote. It requires in order to actually move legislation forward or a confirmation forward, you need to break a filibuster. You actually vote for what's called cloture, and that requires 60 votes. That's still true for the Supreme Court nominee, but I think it's changed for the lower courts, hasn't it?
Right. I was trying to remember if it was 2011 or 2013, but it wasn't that long ago that when the Democrats had the majority in the Senate, they changed the rule, because for many years the rule had been to get a federal court appointment, whether it was district court, the appeals court, which is called the circuit court, or Supreme Court. You had to essentially you could get a filibuster going. Someone could just stand up and talk. And the only way to stop a filibuster is a cloture vote, which required 60 people. So essentially, if you had 60 people, if you couldn't get 60 people to shut down the filibuster, you ultimately had to surrender and give up on the nominee because you couldn't make the filibuster stop. So what the Democrats did, because they felt like their nominees were not being given adequate or fair treatment, they changed the rules so that now for the district court and the circuit court of appeals, it's just a simple majority vote to pass someone nominated to be in one of those courts. But they held on to for the Supreme Court that we're still going to have the potential for filibuster and the cloture vote. But where we are now is, if it really is true, the Democrats are going to say in the next 4 years, we're going to prevent, because we don't have 60 Republican votes in the GOP. We have, in the Senate, we have 51. So you may hear some people in the Senate on the Democrat side saying, we're just never going to let any of these folks, we're just going to filibuster, and there'll never be a vote. And so then it will become the question whether Republicans should say, okay, and they used to call this the nuclear option, but we Republicans, we're going to exercise a nuclear option, we're going to change it, and we're going to make a simple majority vote for the Supreme Court of the United States. And I know the temptation is great to do that because there's a sense that, Republicans won, Trump gets to make the nominations, and the Senate's not cooperating. But there is a really higher idea behind the Constitution of this notion that you really want to protect the decision and you want to have the interests of the most people possible represented among those who make the decision to put that person on the Supreme Court. If you're really going to essentially, cut the Democrats off at the knees, and so they have no way to stop you, number one, it'll come back to bite Republicans, because at some point there may be a Democrat majority in the future, and they'll do the same thing to the Republicans. So it's a very dicey thing. I think if you're just a student of history and a student of America's Constitution and a lover of the system of government we have, you recognize and appreciate the protection built in that does not let people just ramrod through a Supreme Court justice by 51 votes. Having said that, I don't think 4 years with 8 people in the court is the right thing. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to start nominating squishy moderates. I think he's going to nominate people who will stand for the ideas that he believes in. So we're in for, as you say, get your popcorn.
It's going to be amazing. Let me make an argument and see if you guys agree or disagree. And that is, in most cases, I think a majority should be used for passing pieces of legislation and the rest, because it's not fair to have 49% of the country prevent 51% of the country from being able to enact their legislation, whatever that might be. In many cases, it's 30% preventing the 70% from enacting it, or even 41% from enacting that. And so that seems to be the best basic argument. But there are a couple of times when we thought that a supermajority is necessary, and one was to actually have a constitutional amendment. You need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the legislatures. My argument would be with the Supreme Court, because they are sort of making constitutional law. I may not like that. They are really establishing that. Remember what we talked about with Rodney, whether it's Roe versus Wade, whether it's Obergefell, whether it's, issues of abortion or same-sex marriage. They really are making constitutional law. That's why I still think you would want to keep something that would require a supermajority for a Supreme Court nominee, but that would be different for a federal court because you still have to just deal with the day-to-day activities that need to actually be adjudicated at the lower level. So I would make the case that what we have right now is probably the best set of circumstances, and at least that's the way I would try to argue it, at least.
I'm not going to argue with the idea about the Supreme Court. But I don't think it was a good thing that Harry Reid changed it for the lower courts. I think it would have been better if even the lower courts still had to get a cloture vote and that there was still a opportunity for filibuster there. I think it would have been better, but I don't think we should change it back now because we've got an agenda we've got to push forward, and the Democrats had 8 years to do theirs, so we've got to do it.
Okay, my good angel, my bad angel are arguing. Okay. My good angel, Love America, is saying you're right, that we should be noble about it. And the Supreme Court, the federal court appointments, even district court, which are the source of rulings that later end up in the Supreme Court, even the circuit courts, all those matter. So we should subject the choices of those for people to serve in those courts to the broadest possible review by all. And so we therefore should have, get rid of the Harry Reid rule and go back to the rule where you can filibuster anybody and you need the 60 votes for cloture. But I do think, so that's my good angel. What my bad angel is saying is, the Democrats will do this again. If we go back, we say, okay, we're going to do the nice guy thing, the patriotic thing. We're going to go ahead and allow you guys to block our nominees. As soon as the Democrats have a majority, they'll go right back to what they did before. And so I feel like it's just like loosening the football or something. At some point, you can't keep giving them an opportunity to make you fall flat on your face.
Maybe since it's done, it's been done, and there's no going back.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hard to decide, but again, the framers understood that sometimes a supermajority is a good idea, and certainly the ones written into the Constitution to create a constitutional amendment. And if nothing anything else, that really makes the case for keeping a supermajority for a Supreme Court nominee. And I think Penna's argument is pretty good, too. It would be nice to have that for all the individuals who, even at the lower levels, are really making constitutional law. Someday we'd like to turn that around. I don't know how we do that, but nevertheless, we are not going to change that tomorrow. That is already sort of set in stone, and it's not going to change anytime soon. Let's take a break, though. We'll take some more phone calls, and we've had a chance to talk about some of those Supreme Court nominees, but I can see some of you want to talk about some of those issues. So when we come back, straight ahead, we'll take some of your phone calls. All that coming up right after this. 1-800-351-1212. We'll try to slip in as many phone calls before the end of the program. We'll be back right after this.
Peggy Noonan was a speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan. These days, when a president makes an important speech, you can expect to read her thoughts on it in her column in the Wall Street Journal. She may offer praise or critique, but what I really look for is her discernment of the speaker's motivations and her knack for explaining why this particular president said what he said. As President Trump delivered his inaugural address, I kept thinking that it sounded like a campaign speech. That didn't necessarily seem like a bad thing to me. I learned later that lots of people made the same observation. Trump hit his campaign themes hard. This, says Peggy Noonan, was by design. The essential message, she wrote, was, remember those things I said in the campaign? I meant them. I meant it all. President Trump made some big promises in the speech. Some appeal to most Americans. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Of the myriad inner city problems, President Trump said, this American carnage stops right here and stops right now. He said, we'll unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Can an administration really do these things? Will President Trump take his promises seriously? Will he get right to work? Where will he start? There are things the new administration can do right away to get the ball rolling on promise keeping, and it actually did a couple of them on day one. Kelly Shackelford, president and CEO of First Liberty Institute, had a column published last week in The Hill entitled 6 Ways Trump Can Advance Religious Freedom in His First 100 Days. Kelly writes, first and perhaps most ironically, ministries and churches need immediate relief. He explains, ministries have faced crippling multi-million-dollar fines unless they participate in insurance that provides abortion pills and contraceptives against their faith. The government dogmatically continues this threat. But President Trump can eliminate this threat through executive action. On day one, President Trump signed 2 executive orders that begin to fulfill this item on First Liberty's wish list. One of the executive orders declares an immediate freeze on any new federal regulations. The other directs agencies to grant relief to all constituencies affected by the Affordable Care Act. Over the previous few days, federal agencies have been rushing to write as many regulations as they could before the new administration took power. The Trump orders call a halt to the regulation writing and begin the process of reversing burdensome ACA regulations, some of which force businesses and nonprofits to violate the faith convictions of their owners or sponsoring organizations. It's heartening to see this move to unwind repressive regulation. You can read Kelly Shackelford's other 5 recommendations at thehill.com. Hopefully, the new administration works quickly to implement all of them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Debbie Georgatos, and let's head to Ricky in Louisiana. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I want to talk about the murder of the little babies there. I heard a doctor obstetrician in New York City that oversaw like 75,000 murders of the little unborn children. And, if I say so, I'm just a peon, nobody listen. But this guy, was like head of planned murderhood for all of New York City for like 20 years. Anyhow, he oversaw 75,000 murders of the little unborn children. In fact, he even murdered, his own wife, his little unborn child. And this is what he said. He said that until the Christians get their terminology correct, they will never win against the murder of the little babies. By using the little soft, sugar-coated term, which is a Democratic term, abortion, you will never gain any headway. Killing little babies is premeditated, cold-blooded murder in the first degree. If you start using that, then y'all will start turning the tide. But you got to use it. It's just like Obama not wanting to use the term, Islamic, Muslim terrorists. I mean, of course, you can't win it. That's what this doctor said, and I never forgot it. He said, unless Christians use the right terminology, killing little babies, it's not abortion. That's a Democratic made-up term to make it a little soft. But you call it what it is. It's first-degree premeditated murder in the most heinous form, the slaughter of little bitty babies. If Christian, and y'all really, I understand why you don't say it, Kerby, because all the talk show hosts, the Christian radio stations are very nice people. Real super nice. You're super nice, but there's no way to nicely kill somebody.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, sometimes we soften the impact of all that. Of course, yesterday we had a discussion about the film that has just come out about Kermit Gosnell, and we got into it. As a matter of fact, I had to use a parental advisory because when you start talking about blood-soaked floors and you talk about fetal feet in the cabinets and things like that, it was a reminder of how gross it was to actually be in that particular abortion mill. But go ahead.
I saw the movie. I hope it's made. I hope it's actually been made. I hope it's distributed. Abortion is a term the left doesn't even like. They don't like their doctor. They call them doctors. They don't like them to be called abortionists.
Yeah.
Abortion is it's a word they don't really like. They call it pro-choice, not pro-abortion. Murder is even more descriptive. Murder in the womb. But I think abortion. I think people know what abortion is.
Yeah. The other thought about that is what words you can use that can help be more persuasive with the average person. And I think that for especially young women and young women facing an unplanned pregnancy or whatever age they are, I think that the ability of those who love life and love Jesus and love the scriptures, they want to bring the right answers to America. There is a value in using a little bit softer terms to bring them around. I thought the pro-choice movement was really harmed when the pro-life movement began. I've said this in the show before, but went from criticizing and attacking the women and saying it to a message of we love you, we want to help you, we care for your child, we care for you, it's a wholeness, we embrace you and love you. There's something about using somewhat softer language that maybe is more appealing to people. I don't know whether that's an apt response to what you just had to say, but I think there's something about you want to bring people around and I don't know, maybe calling it murder would wake more people up.
But murder in the womb, you have to say murder in the womb because abortion is murder in the womb and murder can be thought of differently. So it's a descriptive term. You know what the disturbing part of it to me to think about today is that there have been 60 million abortions since Roe versus Wade. 60 million.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know that.
60 million.
Yeah. And on Wednesday, you will be doing a program, and they're actually, interestingly enough, the most pro-life generation is the millennial generation. So you might ask your millennials that are around the round table or by phone, what works for them, because maybe they just are saying the same thing. I finally came to this when I realized what was going on, that we were killing babies inside the womb. And I'd like to see what some of the millennials would say, because they're really about straight talk. They don't like all the fluff. And matter of fact, if anything, you would think some of them would be supportive of a president's pretty much of a straight talker. You never have to wonder what's on the mind of Donald Trump, right? And so we'll see how that plays out. But let's take at least one more phone call. We'll head to South Carolina. Catherine, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Well, thank you very much. I just accidentally tuned in. I just moved here about 3 days ago and so intrigued with your show. I can't even explain to you how much the information you're providing is so valuable. And I've got questions, statements, and it's like the perfect source for me. So thank you so much for
And usually when we have a first-time caller, first-time listener, they go, okay, what exactly is this all about? And, of course, today it's a roundtable discussion. So we have Penna, Dexter, and Debbie Georgatos. Sometimes we have various guests, but we cover all sorts of different issues so that you are aware of that. It's a network program, so not only are we in South Carolina, but everywhere from Florida to Maine, from California all the way to Alaska. So you're actually speaking on a nationwide program, but give us at least one comment here, and we'll see if we can try to respond to it.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to mention that I am Christian. There is something that I've learned when I was little, that the word Christian is only mentioned in the Bible, I think, like 3 or 4 times total, and it's used as a derogatory term, actually. So when people refer to themselves as Christian, they almost use it as an excuse nowadays. So when I'm hearing, like, talking about the Democrats renaming the term abortion to doctors, and the next time, who knows what it's going to be down the road, but it reminds me of that, because if you actually look at what the Bible says, we're all supposed to be disciples. If you believe in Christ, you're supposed to be a disciple, which means that Christ said that you believe in one God, and then after that you do everything in love. So my question, I have 3. I'll try to make them real quick. The first one is, as far as gay marriage is concerned, one of the things that we talk about is free will. There's free will, and that's the thing that's been frustrating me the most about the Democratic Party lately, is that they're trying to limit everyone's free will in the name of what's right for everyone, what they feel is right. And so when it comes to something like gay marriage, and we have the opportunity to have consenting adults make those choices, if they want to make those things themselves and they're not harming other people, the freedom should be there allowed for them, in my opinion.
Let me jump in real quickly, because we're getting real close on time, but we would say that, individuals are freely associate wherever they want, but will you have the statewide approval of that? And that's what, of course, the Supreme Court decision was all about, right?
Yeah, and the Supreme Court made that decision for us, so now the battle we fight is, does everyone have to be forced to go along with that, even though that violates the tenets of your faith?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we're so short on time. I'm not sure which direction to go, but I think we can all accept we have free will, but we also have responsibility in this country to share our faith, to share our beliefs, and to try to bring those beliefs into action some way, or into fruition through the laws we have.
I'm glad Catherine called. I hope you'll call back, Catherine.
Yeah. And again, since it's our first program, lots of times when I have somebody hearing the program for the first time, they kind of go all over the map because they haven't even listened to all of it. But one of the things Marlon Maddox, the original host of this program, used to say is, listen for a while, and then you'll kind of get a sense of what it's all about. But Debbie, just before we run out of time, let me mention again that they can go to the website, pointofview.net, and find out about the program that you will be doing on Sunday, America Can We Talk? And one last time, let me also encourage you to take action to support Israel and block UN funding, and that's on the website, pointofview.net. Penn, I'm looking forward to your Millennial Roundtable this next week. I'm looking forward to hearing Debbie on Sunday, and most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Tina and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them